Om Sahanavatu Sahanau Punaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Mastuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us. May that one give us vigor as we work together and vigor in our studies as well. And maybe not unnecessarily argue together. And peace, peace, peace be unto all. So we are continuing our study of the 18th chapter. And the title this evening is The Art of Work. I could easily have made it The Art of Work as a Work of Art. And so we'll discuss this. But maybe it's good to review where we've come from in this chapter. As mentioned previously, this is a review chapter or a summary chapter, the whole of the Bhagavad Gita. And so for that reason, it's a very lengthy chapter. You see, when we talk about action and duties, what is required for us in the world, if you have absolute purity of mind, then you have no duties, they fall away from you. But generally speaking, that is not us. Generally speaking, we are striving to make the mind purer, and all action done in a yogic way, that is karma yoga, which is the suitable yoga really for most people today. Most people today will have to earn a living. Most people will have some kind of occupation. And so most people will have a bank account and all the rest of it. Therefore, most people today are engaged in some form of activity. Even in monastic life, we're engaged in service for the welfare of all beings, upliftment of humanity. This also is action. And we have to also consider that no action takes place without some thought behind it. Some willing movement has to take place. And so most of us will have to deal with this idea of replacing egocentrically driven and motivated activities, and we have to replace this with something noble and pure, and that means with no sense of self, either as a doer, as an actor, or as a profiteer. And so renunciation, it was set up front in this chapter, is renunciation of desires on the one hand, and on the other hand also a renunciation of the fruits or the effects of work. There's a slightly different interpretation amongst the classical commentators, such as Shankaracharya, Ramanuja, Madhva, representing the three approaches, central approaches in Vedanta, as to this idea. Shankaracharya will say that on the path of jnana, here in this Bhagavad Gita called Sankhya, but it's the same process, jnana yoga, that we have to drop all activities. And so all these comments will be relevant only to the karma yogis. But you see, the Bhagavad Gita itself denies that position, because when we talk of sannyasa, nobody is thinking of monastic life. What people are thinking of, and what Krishna is thinking of, and Arjuna is also thinking of, is the renunciation of desires. And this is defined. Now, desire stems from an egoistic position. Egoistic position means I form an identity of myself. And this is formed from a very early age. And this is encouraged by the environment, the society. And this particular self-image will have to defend itself and will have to respond to nature as it's presented, will have to respond to itself as an individuality and also its environment. And this response collectively is called egoism. It involves claiming agency. I am doing it. And it involves also doing something to get something. It involves also claiming the profit or claiming the end result of whatever action was there. And so two terms have been used, just to remind you, sannyasa and tyaga. That is, renunciation of desires is necessary, and renunciation of the fruit of the activities is necessary. And in a sense, it amounts to the same thing, because we desire a result. And the desires can be either blatantly objective, such as a desire to possess something, but behind that is something more subtle. Behind that is a desire deeply rooted in the psyche to preserve the sense of individuality, a self-image. Recently, a few weeks ago, we did a part 1 of our personality development course that deals precisely with this subject, Enneagram and Essence of Truth, to say that individual personalities have certain desires that they are pulled toward against certain fears that they are pulled away from. And it is this struggle between this duality that presents us with the difficulty that we call I. Of course, we don't register it as a difficulty. We register it as something positive. But then you see, it doesn't address the central issues that we're all beset with. We recognize the joy of birth, but then when it comes to the end of it, the death, we don't like it, either of another or ourselves. And the closer we get, maybe, the more difficult it becomes for us. Supposing a doctor has told you, you have something like 3 months to live or something, initially there's a shock about it. Where does the shock come from? Because somehow, irrationally, we think we live forever, or at the very least, we never considered this question of death. We avoided it as something that we shouldn't really address, a morbid subject. And the reason why we want to live like that is because our own essential nature is existence itself, called Atman. This Atman does not move anywhere. But what Krishna has done is, he has generously employed all the different approaches of his day, as it were, or Vyasa has done it, in order to get us to understand the principle of something. We cannot practice, and in this case, we cannot practice work as an art unless we understand the principle first. Otherwise, all our activity will be very rough. The whole idea of saying that there's an art of something means it's something cultured and refined, and requires an element of creativity, a new way of thinking. It requires energy. It requires going to a workplace in a practical way, or even engaging in work, as is commonplace now, from the home, with an element of anticipation and enthusiasm, not for a result, but for the whole action of work, making it an art. Imagine now, and I think I may have told you this before, in Zimbabwe, there was a friend who was literally an artist. And so he used to make this comment, I'm so fortunate because I am doing something that I really, really love and enjoy. So for that reason, at the end of the day, having labored over a picture, as it were, he can sleep happily at night, no mental tension, is enthusiastically anticipating some more refinements to his painting, and taking great, great pleasure at each moment, at each stroke. Now, of course, supposing he was engaged to do that for a professional fee, and supposing he had a deadline, maybe his enjoyment might diminish, I don't know. But that's the same with all of us. We don't necessarily treat this work that we have to do in an artistic way that involves creativity, that involves this employment of enthusiastic energy. And so mentally, if we take it as a mere chore or worry about its outcome and its effects, whether the effects will be in our favor or not, whether it will be good, whether it will be bad, whether it will turn out successfully or whether it will be a failure, all these worries and anxieties make the mind turbulent. And quite simply, when we talk of a sattvic mind, a pure mind, all we are saying is that the turbulence within the mind created by egocentric concerns and activities, putting ourselves in a very small circle of activity where we are obliged to preserve our status quo, it becomes a fight, it becomes a battle. There are some wonderful reasons why the whole of this Bhagavad Gita is situated on a battlefield. This great philosophy is expounded because we seem to be battling against the odds, and in the same dilemma as Arjuna finds himself on a battlefield. So the whole analogy of a battlefield is very, very relevant to all of us for all time, because we're trying to do the best we can and we find no peace of mind, and we're looking at the alternatives. If this work is giving me anxiety, why don't I give it up and change my occupation? Why don't I go into retirement? Some people actually say, oh, I just look forward to the day when I don't have to do anything. I can do what I like, go where I like. And then you find when they get the opportunity, they suffer from boredom. And then, of course, the ultimate boredom, unfortunately, with some cultures, is to put the old person into an old age home, where they then develop a rust, as it were, mental rust, physical rust. And the impulse to live a useful life goes away in many cases. And it becomes a depressing thing and hastens, really, the mortal end for a person. So we should see what is the enthusiastic enterprise that we're engaged in. And there's one important thing, just to remind you, because the text that we're following is the Bhagavad Gita, as translated with commentary and so on by Swami Ch.18. And the reason why that particular text is selected is because it inserts some very useful comments taken from the Gospel of Ramakrishna, from the 19th century mystic, Sri Ramakrishna, as some practical dimension to what we're speaking about from his own experience. And what he's saying is that in your physical activity, you need to repeat. It's a requirement to mentally repeat the Lord's name in all your activities, your physical activities. This is the great significance of japa, repetition of a mantra, or repetition of some kind of affirmation that fully represents some entity that is close to you, personal entity. Going back to the 12th chapter of this Bhagavad Gita, we realize that the easiest route is this bhakti yoga. And in order to declutch our sense of ego, that is the prophet-actor complex, to transcend that, we can employ two methods. First method would be to replace the ego and reverently install the Lord, so that all his energy through all eyes and ears and hands and legs we see as his flowing grace. Staying there in an impersonal way, not getting involved, and working for the welfare of all beings. Another way will be to see the self in all beings and all beings in the self. And we can insert our personal ideal of God there, and so we can say, seeing that personal deity in all beings and all beings within that personal deity adds an element of adoration and worship. Then if we do all activities for the Lord's sake, it adds an extra layer, an extra dimension of worship and joy and pleasure. And now, of course, we can see how creative and how beautiful this work can be. Is there really any difference between offering a flower at an altar or shrine on the one hand, or lighting a lamp, or offering some water? Do you remember Lord Krishna's minimum requirement for a ritualistic offering? A flower, a leaf, some water. Very simple. Not so long ago, I had a discussion with somebody who had learned the intricacies of puja. And with a sense of fun, I said, how complicated is it to do puja? And they said, oh, so complicated. How long did it take you to learn? Oh, months and months and months. Even now I have to think, I have to use a book to guide me and so on. And it's very, very complicated. If you don't do this right, if you don't do that right, if you forget this, forget that, it's a lot to remember. And particularly, there are some pujas which are extraordinarily complex. Kali Puja, for example, Durga Puja, these are extraordinarily complex pujas. And so then I said, with a little bit of a sense of fun, kind of devil in my eyes, I said, actually, it can be very simple. What does Krishna have to say about it? And then they thought, I never read anything in the Bhagavatam or the Puranas or Life of Krishna, what does it say? And they thought, and I reminded them of this passage in the Bhagavad Gita, that if you offer simply, just in a simple way, you see, because it's not what you offer, it was the purity of intention. What is the sincerity with which you do it? What is the love that you put in? And what this whole Bhagavad Gita is telling us, in terms of this offering, in terms of, for example, work, in terms of the second method, what it's telling us is that every action, every work can be a worship, if you take it in the right way. But action itself has a mixed effect. Action by itself, of course, has a mix of good and evil. Supposing by lamplight, you're able to study the scripture, let's take the Bhagavad Gita itself, it's likely that some insect will come and fall into the flame. So all action has this mixture of good and evil. It is for your good that you were able to study and get some inspiration from a scripture, but it was the insect's misfortune that this happened. So how do we get out of this mixture? And this 18th chapter discusses this relationship of action with cause and effect. Every cause has an effect. It is Swami Vivekananda in his Karma Yoga, in the chapter of freedom, and he mentions this relationship, this causal relationship. He says that everything within our universe is molded by the conditions of space-time and causation. Everything that we know or can possibly know must be subject to causation. And that which obeys the law of causation cannot be free. It is acted upon by other agents and becomes a cause in its turn. But that which has become converted into the will, which was not the will before, but which, when it fell into this mold of space and time and causation, became converted into the human will, is free. And you see, so it's depending on this human will that we're able to transform this causation into something much better, instead of allowing it just to run free. From freedom, he says, it comes and becomes molded into this bondage, and it gets out, goes back to freedom again. And of course, that leads to, therefore, other questions. So this is an important thing. because many people ask, so in a practical way, how is it that we're able to do this karma yoga? I have never come to grips with this karma yoga, says one devotee. But Sri Ramakrishna has that simple formula. Where possible, I'll rephrase it, where possible, in doing physical activity, where the mind is not specifically in a concentrated way engaged, we can at least mentally and lovingly repeat the Lord's name. That has the impact of saturating the unconscious mind or the habit level with this sattva that we require, this purity of mind. And all activities done as a yoga, karma yoga, is there only to purify the mind. So that is a very important lesson, repeating the Lord's name as a practical way of implementing karma yoga, and that is developing work as an art form. Knowing, of course, that we have no business claiming either the fruits or the effects of this action, because it's not our energy, nor do we have any doership claim, and this will come out because first lesson given to Arjun is that this entity that you call Arjun, a body-mind complex together, and a component there which registers agency, that is not who you are. Deep down is the authentic and real self, and we have to be convinced of that. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we have to be convinced that nature is not separate from that supreme. It is simply that supreme. When you add time and space and causation, is what we call the world. And it is this nature that is doing everything. So these are some lessons repeated and highlighted now in this 18th chapter. And then, of course, employing head, heart, and hand. So last week we mentioned these three dimensions of worship, what we call yajna, that is adoration and worship. Secondly, we mentioned this aspect of giving, this generosity of spirit. And thirdly, we mentioned tapasya, that is austerity, that really is a cultivation of will. Another way of saying that is coordinating the head, the heart, and the hand. The hand representing this giving, generosity of spirit, the heart representing adoration, and the head representing the will. In other words, taking all the talents and inherent capacity that you have as a human being and using it to transform discord into harmony. And the human has that capacity to do it. This is the sport that we call spiritual life. So that is where we left it off. And we'll pick it up then. The 12th stanza goes like this, and is addressing the question of a person who's attached to life and action. Anishtam, ishtam, mishram cha, trividham karmanaha param, bhavatyatma atyaginam pretya natu samnyasinam kvachit. This threefold fruit of action, evil, good, and mixed, accrues after death to one who does not relinquish, but there is none ever for the one who renounces. Just remind you of a question and an answer that was there. Question being, how do we know when we have embraced this renunciation, renouncing this agency and renouncing this fruits of our actions? Is because You don't care what the quality of the activity is. Anything that is presented, you don't favor. You don't choose something that you like choosing or reject something that you don't like doing. You simply deal with everything with an aspect of mindfulness. And that is the art of work means we have to be able to concentrate. When we reject all the results or effects of the future, we are rejecting the future tense. In rejecting the future tense, we're also rejecting anxiety. Anxiety only comes when we are anxious about what the possible results or outcomes are in the future, or what the possible scenario is in the future. What if this happens? What if that happens? Well, it didn't happen yet. And when you do that, you have lost this present moment. Even if you don't put God in this present moment, or the Lord in this present moment, you can at least take this present moment as some unique opportunity to put something in, to put the full capacity of your concentration and attention into that present moment, and do only one unit activity at a time. The mind is constructed like that. It is not designed to do everything in one go, because time is there. Time is there, and it only comes as, or is seen to come as, a series of units in which change occurs. You can put something in there, and then another thing, and then another thing. And if you see many of the world's disasters and mistakes, is because a lapse of concentration happened for one moment. Let's take a car accident, for example. A car accident in traffic, a car stops suddenly in front of you. And where was your attention? You were looking at some new building on the right-hand side, something like that. And you didn't see how this car braked suddenly and you went into the back of them. Just that split moment of second of distraction was enough to cause an error mistake. And it is only, psychologically speaking, through concentration that we can master this work and do it efficiently with great skill. And everybody has a different skill. So this Bhagavad Gita is encouraging us not just to do action, not any action, but to do the action to which we are suited. Because if we don't do that, says the Gita in an earlier passage in this chapter, then you see this obligatory work that we have to do, even just to maintain the body, puts us into a sense of disharmony. If we don't bathe, then it puts the nose of our neighbor in disharmony. We don't smell so good. And if we don't employ our individual talents, think of it in this way. The universe is constructed in such a way, and we have to take for granted, particularly in putting God in everything and everything in God, that entity is the source of everything, the originator of everything, and the sustainer of everything also, and is pervading everything. With that confidence, we can proceed. So, this world, in a sense, is designed. And you have individual talents and abilities that nobody else has. Otherwise, how can we successfully build anything? We're constructing something here, our Vivekananda Hall, and I have no skill in plastering, mixing the plaster, and we stand on stilts and dance around and do the skimming on the ceiling and so on and so forth. There are some people not suited to that. They haven't learned that, nor do they enjoy that for that reason. There are other people who are very good and quick with accountancy figures and so on. If you want to build a building, then there must be people who are architects. There must be people who are planners. There must be financiers. There must be people who can be specialized in putting electrical things in, plumbing, fittings, interior decorating, all of these things. When you bring them all together, then you have a building. And so how marvelous it is that this world is constructed in such a wonderful rhythmic way that everything fits into everything else. And if you try to fit some square thing into a round hole, it doesn't work. And the whole universe has backup plans to make it work. But for that moment in time, you're creating a disharmony in the local area which you're operating. But because we don't consider this whole universe to be one thing, we tend to think that our small action won't affect anybody else and won't affect any other thing. So this threefold action is there, and it is labeled as Trividam, threefold. And the fruit of this action is to do with this causal law that we mentioned. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction somewhere, and it begins with thought. And thinking is the most powerful functional action that we can do. And so naturally, it'll come into three flavors. Some people think in a good way, and that leads to good action, and that will lead to good results. And good results can be a heaven here on earth, or it can be a hell here on earth. Evil actions will produce that. Don't think it's only in a post-mortem condition that you get any kind of reward or result. It can be here itself. But mainly humans have this mixed thing. So evil, good, and mixed accrues after death to one who does not relinquish, that is, does not relinquish the fruits of their activities. But there is none ever for the one who renounces. That means when you fine-tune this art of renunciation, then sattva is saturating to the extent that freedom is there. That doesn't mean to say that you stop work. The person who is free now just hangs on, as it were, doing the action still not giving up actions, but in this case now as an open channel of divine grace to flow to others. Does it just to finish things off, as it were, cross the T's and dot the I's, and then leave off and leave the world in a better place. So there are marks, says this commentary here, to indicate that a person has reached this perfection and that he no more needs to be born again, either in a plus or a minus state or in a mixed state. And such a person is ever contented in the self, because the key is no more desires are there. A desire is a disturbance of the mind. It's an assumption that there is some kind of hollow, some kind of defect, some kind of unfulfilled entity or thing in me, and I have to get it, and the outside will supply it. And when I fill it, as it were, or think I fill it, it empties again, filling and emptying, and never ever being feeling fulfilled. And so, with no desires there, then there are no effects. If you have no causes, there are no effects. So a person ever contented in the self, that is, that if he has this idea of worship, then he understands that the Lord is the fulfiller of all desires. That is, love for the Lord means there is no deficit anywhere. It completely fulfills all my desires. The body is hanging on him like a shadow. The activities of that body take place meticulously in spite of his having withdrawn the mind from it. And while actively in the world, is not of the world. So many metaphors are used for this. One metaphor is the swan, that it glides through the water, but not affected by the water. Another one is the lotus flower that stands above the water The great difference between a lotus flower and a lily. A lily sits in the water, but a lotus flower, its stem comes out of the water, and therefore the water does not affect it. That is why the lotus flower is a symbol of purity. The immediate future birth of a man attached to action, and I'm doing this action, that kind of attitude may also be inferred now and here. Death and rebirth are like sleep and reawakening. And the person who goes to sleep gets up in the same body, and the man who dies wakes up in another body. A bad man going to sleep wakes up a bad man, and so is the case. The good man too wakes up as a good person. But there are people who wallow in hell even here on earth, says this commentary. And there are others who behave like brutes. Yet others walk on earth as celestials, and they make a heaven of this world. Still others exhibit all human traits only, and all these varying characteristics go along with them when they relinquish the existing bodies and choose new, or choose to build. They choose to build new bodies. It's not something imposed on us. It's all our own cause and effect. Their rebirths are according to their traits, and the sequence is maintained. Now, of course, this brings in this idea of, do we have to believe in rebirth? Do we have to believe in this transmigration? No, you don't have to believe in it. But if you look at it logically, it is the only alternative we have. You can't have a suggestion, and Swami Vivekananda brings this out, that the soul appears in one moment and goes on infinitely. If it's infinite, it was always infinite. So for convenience sake, we might think of it this way. Just theologically, it might happen. But from an absolute 100% logical perspective, we find it's not tenable. Materialists will say, all your traits that you have today have come from your genetic inheritance. This is true of the human body. The XY chromosomes combined will form this individuality that we call this nose, these eyes, and so on, this height, and so on. All of that comes inherited. And we are also there fulfilling the aspirations of thousands and thousands of ancestors either side of that hereditary line. And that then means you cannot say that these mental characteristics that happen, even in the womb, we can trace it, has anything to do with XY chromosomes. Otherwise, if your father was a fool, you'd be a fool. So there's an individuality there. And the only way, combined with this analysis of who am I, and the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita tells us that we are the knower in the field. Not only that, but then there's only one knower in all the fields. And when we come to that analysis and go back through the multiple fields, we'll find the only one left standing is what we call Atman, or the yogis call Purusha, that supreme self which is there, that existing entity that is there. Just sheer logic will tell us this. Sheer analysis will tell us this, followed, of course, by our own experience, our own spiritual practice. And we come to the same conclusion. And so it's not this Atman that reincarnates, that always remains there, but it's the accumulated experience, what we might call the soul, that pushes on to find its freedom. And so just logically, apart from any other research that shows us about memories in past lives and so on and so forth, this is really the only logical way of putting it. So yes, we accept it. Why shouldn't we accept it? If there is a generous entity that made this world of space and time and causality and function and name and form, and gave us the push toward our freedom, won't that entity give us unlimited opportunities just because the body becomes frail and we can't complete our journey in this life? Should we not go on to other lives? So the fruit of action belongs to that person who thinks of themselves as the author of karma. As soon as you think, I am the author of this action, you're caught in the trap, and the fruit will come to you. Happiness and misery come to him or her as a result of this thought. But a person is in reality, or you can ask the question, is a person in reality the originator of this action? That's the relevant question. And that leads then to the next stanza. Panchayatani mahabahu karanani nibotame samke krutante proktani sithaye sarva karmanam. Learn from me, says Krishna. These 5 factors in the accomplishment of all action as taught in the Sankhya, which is in the end of action. And these lessons are taught from the 13th stanza to the 16th, giving us a structure, what is necessary for action to take place. One component is what we are attributing all these actions to, namely me. But it's only one of 5 factors. And therefore, just Krishna is presenting this idea. If you think that you're creating this action, you're sorely mistaken. I give this example very often. And probably so often that you probably know it by heart by now. So asking school children, saying to them, tomorrow I'll bring a cake that was made by 100 people. And the following day you bring a cake in a reasonable size. And the children then are astonished. I thought you were going to bring a cake in that 100 people had constructed, had baked. I said, actually, more than 100 people baked this cake. Because you see, you didn't consider you only consider the one person who baked it. Or if it's multiple people, 100 people involved in the baking, then so be it. But there was somebody who packaged it. There was somebody who marketed it. There was somebody originally who sowed the weed at the right time. There was the people who supplied the water supply, the people who put the irrigation pipes down. Then there were the people who harvested. There were people who ground it. And then, of course, that went in packages. The people who made the packages. And that got sent to a mill and was ground. And that grinding powder, if you like, that then got combined with other ingredients, made into a dough, and then got put into the oven. It was taken out, it was cooled, as I said, it was packaged, it was marketed, it was delivered, and it was purchased. In purchasing it, probably a bank was required, and that bank had money in it that was earned from work. And that work required an employment system. And this is leaving out completely all the other elements, because without sunshine, without water, without air, none of this is possible. And then for sunshine and air, what else is necessary? The whole universe is necessary. You come to a conclusion, the whole universe is necessary in this one single activity, in this one single product. So we have no business claiming or complaining for that matter, but we have no business claiming anything of our own. We just didn't think it out properly. We just took this egoistic position that acts as our trap. And so, for good reason, Sri Krishna sorts out what is necessary for any action to take place. And he highlights 5 factors, and he attributes it to the Sankhya philosophy. And the whole idea would be that he attributes it to Samke Krantante. That is, that which goes back to the original thinkers many, many years ago was declared. And so he's reconciling here not only those who take that approach, but also endorsing in every system the thoroughly scientific approach of the Samkhya people and the analysis which has taken place. What is that? There are 5 factors according to them. What are these 5 factors? Adhishtanam tata karta karanam cha prathaga vidam vividascha prathak cheshta devam chai va trapanchamam. This body, that's one factor. Physical body is a factor. And then the agent. So the seat, adhishtanam is what it's called. The seat is actually the body. It's a beautiful description. The thing which is sitting here, that is this adhishtanam. So that is necessary, no doubt, because it's like a car. It's like a car which has different parts. A car has to have a body. A car has to have an engine. A car has to have fuel put in. That is the source of its energy. There has to be an intention to drive it somewhere. And even the body has so many different parts assembled. So not just one thing. So then there's the agent. That is the one who says, I'm doing this. This is the one factor. That is the understanding that I am this psychophysical unit, making the mistake in this analogy, I am the car and I'm everything. And then the various senses are there, and then the different functions of various sorts, they all have different functions. And then there's a presiding deity also as the 5th, what we call Jivatman. That is the mistaken owner, or that which reflects the true entity which is there. So we can make this parallel between a car. The proprietor, of course, is the agent. The wheels, steering wheel, the brake, the clutch, the gearbox, these are, of course, equivalent to the various senses. The petrol is what we call prana, the energy that is delivered. And the driver is the manipulating entity. Now, the human being has parts, of course, like this, parallel to all of these things. Body is the center from where attachment and aversion, joy and misery come from. And it has a faculty of understanding, and all these experiences express themselves. Ego is the agent that records these experiences. The senses of knowledge and the senses of action are the various senses, and prana, the life energy, and so on. In the mind, according to the Sankhya, the senses, there are sense organs, physical organs, organic organs, and then there are senses replayed as part of the mind, replayed in dream, for example, or in daydreaming, or memories. These are the real senses, actually. Because, as Swami Vivekananda points out in his Raja Yoga, a person can be sleeping. You can open the eyelid of a sleeping person, the eyeball stares out at you, but the person doesn't see. Something else is required, attention is required. And so these sense organs are there inside the mind as such, as a component of the mind. And then there is manasa itself. That is, there is the reception faculty, a faculty that is able to relate things, absorb things, a kind of reception area, if you will, and delivery area, and a kind of department that evokes memories. And then there is the intellect itself, an executive faculty that decides what to do with all the information and how to deliver a response. And it is the purifying of this executive officer that we mean that when we say purifying the mind, it is really the purification of this intellect. Buddha is one of purified intellect. And then there is the owner, the one who takes ownership, who says I, the coordinating entity. It is not that we want to get rid of ego. It is ego itself is just a faculty. We require it in order to function in a way which dominates nature. We have to have this ego. But it's egoism, that is, identifying ourselves with it. Because behind that is our own glorious self that remains. And all of this mind collectively, we can call personality. That is a mask, persona, mask. The one that stands behind, does not act, does not move, does not go anywhere, has no characteristics like that, humanly speaking, acts as a witness. In the Sankhya philosophy, it's called Purusha. It stands as a witness, and because of its presence, activates the rest, collectively called Prakriti or nature, put into a feminine form. So this is the Sankhya position being delineated here. Whatever action a man or a person performs with this body, speech or mind, whether right or wrong, these five are its causes, not just the one thing. Don't ever think, I did this, I did that, my success, my thought, my creativity, my talent. All of this we take away. It's only one of the five factors. And so, sharira van manoho bhyarjat karma prarabhati naraha nyayam va viparitam va panchayate tasya hetavaha. Whatever action a person performs, sharira, vak, mano, bihi, by body, speech, and mind. These three things are necessary. So, body, speech, and mind, that is thought, word, and deed. We have put it like that. Whether it's right or wrong, these five are its causes. So how is the Atman connected with these activities going on in the body, speech, and mind? We need an answer to this. It comes like this. Tatraivam sati kartaram atmanam kevaram tuhya pasyatya akratra buddhitvan nasa pashyati durmatihi. That being so, the man or the person of perverse mind who, on account of his imperfect understanding, looks upon the self, the absolute, as the agent, he does not see at all. This is our fundamental mistake. Now, if we don't make the mistake, and if we apply these things, we have mastered the art of work. The art of work as a work of art. But it's to understand these principles first, and then to fully, headlong engage in our activity with great enthusiasm. Understanding this new thing. Fundamentally, it is not us that is doing any action, and we cannot claim anything for ourselves. We can neither claim agency, nor can we therefore claim the results. The results will come to us, whatever it is, but it depends on how we think, whether it is in a positive way or a negative way. Will depend on whether we get positive or negative results. And as I say, we have no business to complain, because we ourselves made the order. We ourselves, through our thought, through our thinking capacity, put in an order. It was delivered today. We didn't realize. So when it suits us, we claim the success is for our own. But when an effect comes, we don't recognize that on the same logic, it must have been from ourselves as well, at the psychophysical level. So behind all this activity is all of this, and a doubt may arise whether the fifth cause, that is designated as Deva is actually the word, or literally presiding deity, if you will, is a truth, is a category maybe of nature itself, Prakriti, because ego is as a part of it. All these other things that we mentioned are a part of it. So maybe there's that doubt that comes. Maybe this Deva, this fifth, is actually this fundamental self, this Purusha. And so, or whether it is a part of this nature, Prakriti. And so the truth of it is to be arrived at through an analogy. And the analogy can be either as space or as wind. Right now, we are sitting with a huge, more than a whispering wind, is more like a loud voice of a wind. So there's a storm called Francis that is battering the island of Ireland at the moment and is about to go on without any kind of visa to the UK and so on, all of that. And so what a tremendous thing this air is. Ether and air together, if you want to put it like that, they're almost alike because they move everywhere. Not only they are powerful, or the wind at least, that aspect of it is powerful, but there's a subtlety to them because we cannot see space. We cannot see the electromagnetic field, and we cannot see wind. We can see the effects of it only. But while this Akasha, this space as it were, is all-pervading and immovable, and Vayu is unlimited, air is unlimited, so maybe Deva is also limited in space and is also movable. So similarly, the Deva referred to here is like the Atman, like this Purusha, but not actually this Purusha. It's a reflection of it. So he is Chidabhasa, or reflected Atman. This Deva is the Jivatman, we call it. That is the Atman associated with nature itself, or more a localized version of it, our own experience, and is not this Paramatman, the supreme Atman. A reflected consciousness is not original consciousness, any more than a reflected sun on a wave can ever be the original sun. You have jars, a number of jars, let's say a dozen jars, all with water in it. The sun is shining and you see a dozen suns. Not looking at the sun itself, you assume that 12 suns are present there. So consciousness reflected like this, that's the example that we can use. Paramatman does no work itself. This we have to understand. There is modification in the former, that is in nature, while the latter is free from it. Atma Chaitanya, reflected in Prakriti, is what we call Jivatman. So he works as a category of Prakriti. Jivatman is a category of Prakriti. The Jiva, the Jagat make their appearance. That is, Jiva means something that is live, the life entity, and the Jagat, that is the whole universe. These are categories of nature itself. And they make their appearance on the Paramatma. We can also call it in a different way, Chiddakasha. So in the Sankhya, we find these expressions, Mahakasha, the physical. Chiddakasha, we find the more subtle. Locally, we call it Sukshma Sharira, subtle body. But universally, we call it also a cosmic version of that. But then there is Chidakasha, that is the Paramatma. It's ever constant, immovable, full, perfect. And that is your own nature. The whole purport of all these scriptures will say, that is your own nature. You have to assert it repeatedly. That is your own nature. This is the source of Arjun's strength. It is also the source of our own strength. Let us approach then the work of our day, our daily work that expresses all our skills and talents to make life in general for everyone harmonious. Let us dive into this work with full enthusiasm in order to purify the mind. That's the only reason, not to get a result. And as a consequence, we get the benefit of a peaceful, calm mind. And in doing that, making habitually there, we make the mind pure. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, and that's the result. And that equates to our own freedom. Well, next week, we'll pick the subject up again. And we are now left off on the 17th stanza of the 18th chapter, Moksha Sannyasa Yoga of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. You can subscribe to this channel to get further talks. And then also we are building, as I mentioned. And so there is a GoFund facility that you'll find on our website too. But in the meantime, I hope you got something practical from this evening, something that you can put into action to make your general work an art of work.